Welcome to the Pro Guide Do-It-Yourself Home Improvement video series.
Imagine for a moment that you lived in a black and white world. A drab, colorless place where the only thing that might stimulate your visual interest would be the infinite shades of gray surrounding you. There would be no warm reds or oranges, no cool greens or blues, no cheerful yellows. The subtleties of earth tones, the gentleness of pastels would mean nothing to you. Not too pleasant, is it? One of the least expensive and quickest ways to add color to a room is with paint. Paint can add a lot to almost any room if you pick your colors carefully. Another quick and inexpensive way to do nice things with color is with wall covering. The wide variety of wall covering spans paper, fabric, and exotic combination materials, colors and patterns you'd have to see to believe. I'm Kurt Burbick. This week's show, as you've probably already guessed, is about paint and wall covering. We'll be making the same transformations that worked so beautifully just a moment ago with the photographs. Only this time, it'll be for real. Here's Avian Rogers, who will tell you more about the projects we'll be showing you in the next half hour.
What we're going to show you today are some of the basics in using paint, wall covering, and trim. We're even going to get into some of the intricacies of painting something as detailed as this banister. Then we'll paint this whole hallway. We're going to use a combination of wall coverings to decorate this entire sitting room. And one of the most important steps, and often the most neglected one, is preparation. Because it is so important, and because the basic concepts apply to painting and wall covering, we'll be dwelling on it quite a bit in the first part of the program. But before we go any further, let's go take a look at some of the tools you'll need. The things you need for most paint and wall covering jobs are simple, relatively inexpensive items. When it's a question of what to get quality. The better quality tools make for a better looking job done easily. Now, to do your preparation properly, you want to have a good paint scraper, spackle and spackling knives, and if you're working on large wall surfaces, use an orbital sander.
The basic equipment you see here includes everything you'll need for most household painting projects. A paint roller with a variety of covers to suit the different surfaces you'll be painting, a paint roller extender so you can reach your ceilings, a sash brush for trim, paint trays, ladders, paint buckets, drop cloths, paint stirrers, and cleanup equipment.
One other thing that can come in awfully handy if you have to remove a lot of old wallpaper is a steamer. Now, most home centers and hardware stores have them available for rent. So if you've got a lot of old wallpaper, this is the ticket.
Oh, and I almost forgot. You might want to keep a couple of nails handy and a plastic bag.
A plastic bag? What for?
I'll tell you later in the show. People often skip a part of the process of preparation, or they forget it altogether. But they risk spoiling the end product. And besides, in most cases, preparation isn't all that difficult. For instance, if you have peeling, flaking, or bubbling paint like we've got here, you can remove it with a scraping tool like this. And it's not all that difficult. It is a little time-consuming and a little messy. Now, if you've got deteriorating wallpaper, that can be taken off with a steamer. But we'll show you all that later in the sitting room. Now, not all walls need prep, or the same degree of prep. But this one sure does. Look at the condition it's in. We've got holes and cracks and crumbling plaster here, almost every problem you'd ever find.
This wall here is so damaged that it can't even support a patch. So we're going to have to create some support. Now, you can use some steel mesh or old crumpled newspaper. Now don't forget, each layer should be completely dry before applying the next. And your final coat should be sanded smooth and flush to your wall surface before you paint.
For a sizable crack like this one, you'll need to take several steps and some time to fix it properly. Clean out this larger crack with the pointed end of your can opener blade so that it'll be clean and no loose material will be in there, and that'll make your patch job work better. Now that that's cleaned out, you can take some drywall compound and fill the crack. And when the crack is filled, take a piece of fiberglass tape and embed it in this mud. The fiberglass tape is to give strength to this patch job so that cracks don't reappear over time. Also, you can use fiberglass tape to patch all the many hairline cracks like this one that you'll find in plaster walls. And because it's got a sticky side to it, you can stick that right to the plaster surface, covering up those hairline cracks. Now, while this mud is still wet, apply a second layer on top of the tape and feather it out on each side of the tape so that the tape is completely covered up. And go back and get all the fiberglass tape on your hairline cracks in the wall. After this is dry, it should take 8 to 12 hours. Give it a light sanding, and then come back and give it a second layer of compound, just like you did the first one, where you feather it out on each side smooth with the wall. Do that on all the cracks in the wall. Then, after it's completely dry, you give it a light sanding, and if you have a smooth textured wall like ours, you'll be ready to paint. If there's a special texture on your wall, you'll need to add another layer just to imitate that texture before you paint.
No hole is too small. If you can see it, it's going to show through your paint. So in preparation, you have to take the attitude that every hole needs to be repaired. But the flip side is that the small holes are very easy and very fast to fix.
Whether the problem is old paint or wallpaper, once you've got the defects taken care of, you're going to have to take care of the smoothness problems. And that means you're going to have to sand. Now you can go the traditional route using a sanding block and sandpaper. Or you can use an orbital sander to speed things up.
In most painting situations, major preparation isn't really an issue. You just want to make sure that your walls are free of dirt, grit, and grease. Now you can wash your walls down with a general household cleaner or TSP, trisodium phosphate. It's a little stronger and toxic, but it's not dangerous.
Some people think that a little additional preparation will make for a better job, especially where you've got glossy areas that the paint may not cling to. Now this may mean you want to apply a special liquid undercoating called an adhesive pad, which will help the wall's ability to hold the paint.
Let's take a moment to discuss what kind and how much paint you're going to need. In general, most rooms in the house will be painted with a flat latex paint, where the trim and usually the kitchens and bathrooms you'll use a semi-gloss latex enamel because it's a little more moisture resistant and easier to wash. Now with regards to estimating the amount of paint, you can figure that a gallon of paint will cover from 350 to 400 square feet. So figure your total area that you need to cover and add a tad extra for touch-up. The point here is that you want to try and get as much paint as you need to complete the job, as it can be next to impossible to try and match later on. But if you are using a custom color, as a precaution, hang on to your color numbers.
Here's that trick I mentioned earlier with the nail. If you punch holes in the top of the can like this, it'll allow the paint to drip back down inside instead of filling the groove up at the top.
Gee, Kurt, that's something I wish I'd learned years ago.
You mean how to use this nail this way?
How to handle drips.
The first thing we do is called cutting in. We brush the 2 or 3 inch area in the corner where the roller can't reach. This works out really well because when I roll the paint on, it covers up the brush strokes where the paint overlaps.
This convenient little gadget is called a paint edger. It's got these 2 little wheels right here so that we can paint right up against the trim without getting paint on it. Now once we finish all the cutting in, we'll begin by painting the ceiling first. But before we get into all that, let's go take a look at what Kurt has to show us about loading applicators.
Painting the large surfaces begins with loading your applicator properly so you'll get the best coverage out of your paint. That means loading it fully, but not overloading it. All that takes is dipping your roller into the paint, picking some up, then squeezing off the excess like this, and you're ready to apply it. Now a word about roller covers. They come in a wide variety of nap lengths. The longer lengths are intended for rough surfaces, while the short lengths are intended to cover smooth surfaces. And if you try to apply paint with a long nap roller to a smooth surface, you're liable to get dripping as a result. Or if you try to use too short a nap length for a rough surface, you're going to have coverage problems too, because the short length of the nap isn't going to reach into all the little crevices. So I think we're ready to get started. There are three principles of applying a coat of paint. Spread the paint, which Avian's doing here by using a V-shaped stroke. Fill the area. Do this by using an up and down motion. Finish the coat. This is what the pros call laying off, and it's done by rolling over the existing coat in a direction that produces the smoothest surface. If you use a good roller and keep the edges wet, you won't get any ridges.
Prepping your woodwork and trim is much the same as prepping your wall surfaces, unless of course you're going to actually strip your woodwork. So using spackle, fill all the small holes and little cracks that might appear in the joints. Now because trim is usually painted with an enamelized paint, which is a slicker, glossier surface, it's a good idea to give it a once-over with a light to medium grade sandpaper to create a better bonding surface for your fresh coat of paint.
I'm using an angled sash brush to cut in the top of this baseboard. Here the best way to get a good result is by being just plain careful.
This can be slow going, especially getting coverage up here in these tight little corners, but that's where an angled brush really comes in handy. Now I'm dipping my brush directly into the can, wipe away the excess as I pull it out. Now when painting windows, paint carefully along the wood down to the glass, thereby creating an actual seal between the wood and the glass.
Now, here's the trick I promised you earlier in the show about using a plastic bag. You can actually
Please store your rollers and paintbrushes in the freezer without cleaning them. Just be sure and store them in a plastic bag.
Aha! But be sure it's a clear plastic bag, so that the next time you go to your freezer to get something, you don't mistake it for something else.
Right, Kurt, you wouldn't want to mistake it for a flounder.
Today, designers can take advantage of a wonderful variety of wall coverings. You can choose for color, you can choose for pattern, or you can choose for ease of application by opting for one of the pre-pasted varieties. Or you can choose for ease of cleaning. A number of plastic treated papers and fabric coverings stand up under tremendous abuse, and they look great after a quick sponging. In fact, you can choose.
I like this one and this one. Now, before you remove your wallpaper, you need to remove the objects covering it, like your curtains and electrical fixtures and switch plate covers. In removing these switch plate covers and electrical fixtures, there's really no electrical dangers here to be concerned about. Now, once these objects are removed, you can take your rented steamer and begin removing your wallpaper. To do that, take the steamer plate, pressing it flat against the surface of the wall, allowing the steam from your machine to penetrate through the wallpaper, moistening the paste behind. Then take a putty knife or a wide scraper and begin peeling it back.
This is a nasty looking job, although it isn't quite as bad as it appears. The problem is that old coverings weren't designed to be removed.
Most papers today are strippable, so the next time we want to decorate this room, removing the wallpaper won't be a problem.
Preparing a wall for papering is the same as it is for painting, except for one added step. And that's this. Cover the entire surface with a coat of oil-based primer, Then when that's dry, cover the wall with sizing, like I'm doing now. That'll do two things. It'll allow the paper to adhere to the wall properly, and it'll keep the paper from shrinking when it dries.
Very few homes have exactly vertical walls or corners. So what we need to do is to determine our own plumb line to work off of. And we'll use our wallpaper level to do that. Now, what we're going to want to do is measure out 1 inch less than the width of our wallpaper. This wallpaper is 20 inches wide. So we measure at 19, giving us a full 1 inch that wraps on the inside of the corner that we'll trim away later. Okay, so you've got your mark.
There, that's about right.
There you go. Okay, so I'm going to take the wallpaper, it's pre-pasted, and drop it into this water tray over here. Now I've cut the wallpaper 4 inches longer than the length of the wall, giving us 2 inches at the top and the bottom to allow for pattern adjustment and getting a good fit.
While that's curing, let's talk a moment about wallpaper and paste. Not long ago, all wallpaper coverings were supplied unpasted. Today, most can be bought pre-pasted. And the advantage, of course, is exactly that you don't have to mess around with brushes and pastes. But if the pattern you've selected happens to be unpasted, just remember that most of the principles we're showing you here will apply to that, except that you have to apply your own paste.
Okay, so what we've done here is we've soaked our wallpaper so that the paste on the back gets wet, and we back rolled it so the paste side is on the outside, and as we unroll it, it comes out nice and flat. Now what we're doing here is called booking, which is folding the paste side to the paste side. Careful not to crease it, just a gentle fold. I pulled it out about halfway, and then I'll pull it out the rest of the way. Looks good, great. Now this wallpaper here takes about 2 minutes to cure. That is, it takes 2 minutes for the paste to kind of set up before we'll be ready to hang it. So I'm going to fold it here and let that cure. Now be sure and check your instructions for whatever wallpaper you're using, as different wallpapers do require different soaking and curing times. But this one's ready to hang. And Kurt's got the ladder here. Okay. Help me get that. Okay. Careful. Super. All right. So we want to make sure that we've got 2 inches at the top. How are we along our edge there?
Lining it up.
Okay.
Now we'll trim this piece a little later. The most important thing when positioning this first piece is that this edge line up along the line we put on the wall earlier. Then after it gets positioned, we take a brush and start smoothing the paper on the wall so that we work the bubbles and the wrinkles out toward the edges of the paper from the center. In positioning this second piece, it's important that you butt it up against the edge of the first piece without overlapping it. It's also important that you align the patterns so that they match along this vertical edge.
Once you've got your paper up where you want it, having smoothed out all the main bubbles and wrinkles, you can go over it with a big sponge to get any of the small bubbles remaining. Now the nice thing about a big sponge is that it won't push the paste out like some of the heavier brushes can. You can also go over the seams with a seam roller, but wait about 20 or 30 minutes till after the paper's been hung. Another thing you want to remember is to wipe away any excess paste off your woodwork and the paper itself before it has time to dry.
The process for papering around an opening like this is to bring the paper up as snugly as you can along the door molding or trim, and then find a point of the trim like at the top of the door right here. Tuck the paper in tightly, and with your razor blade knife, start there and cut a roughly 45-degree diagonal line in the paper, And while you're doing that, pull the paper away from the wall so you don't scar the trim. Having done that, you can now fit the paper up even more snugly at this point and find other areas where you have to cut diagonal corners, like right here where the molding changes shape. And I do the same thing. I cut a 45-degree line so that the paper will now fit snugly around the trim here. Now, if you try to pre-measure and pre-cut around openings like doors and windows, you'll find you'll have very disappointing results that way.
I'm doing the same thing down here that Kurt was doing up at the top, and I've got a good sharp razor blade in my knife. Now, something I'd like to emphasize is take your time on this. It'll save you time in the long run from having to go back and fix flaws, not to mention getting a result that's really satisfying.
Now, working your way down the wall, next we'll come to the light switch, here where this bump is under the paper. Find the light switch and try to locate the hole in the wall for your light switch, and with your razor blade knife, cut 2 diagonal lines in an X across the light switch opening. And that'll allow your switch to push through the paper. Now, as you work down the wall, you'll have to make one more diagonal cut at the bottom of this vertical trim piece where it meets the baseboard. Now the process for cutting off the excess paper is as if we were working in a corner or at the ceiling or at the baseboard. That is, you use your drywall blade as a straight edge and simply, with your razor blade knife, trim off the excess paper.
We've added a different but complementary pattern of wallpaper using the same process you've seen before. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just making a diagonal cut right here at the top of this outside corner so that we can carefully wrap our wallpaper around it. Since the outside corner is nice and vertical, it's the easiest solution to go. And then we'll just simply continue covering with our wallpaper the rest of the way.
Papering an inside corner is an easy job, and it includes a little trick that I'll show you in a while. The first piece goes in much like any corner piece, like the one we showed you earlier. In our case, working off a vertical line that's 19 inches away from the corner, so we get this overlap. The second piece is installed much the same way. Now, we're working off some wallpaper coming from the other direction here, so what we need to do is measure from this edge to the corner, add an inch for overlap, cut the piece to that width, and then install it. So I've positioned this piece and trimmed it up at the top, and I just wanted to show you how the two pieces are going to overlap in the corner here. And it's really important that you tuck them both tightly into the corner, because here comes the trick, and it's called a double cut. And I use my taping knife and a razor blade, and I start at the top, and I cut from the top corner all the way down to the bottom, cutting both pieces of paper at once. Now that I've finished this cut, I can start taking this strip away, and I'll have to pull this flap back to get at the one underneath. And if I've been reasonably careful with this cutting process, I should get a nice hairline fit here at the corner.
A really neat thing that you can do with your electrical cover plates is that you can wrap them with your wall covering material by spreading it over the face, then cutting the corners at a diagonal, and then bending it around the back, and then just putting it into place. Starting with the idea of using complementary wall coverings, one a small subtle pattern, the other bold and graphic, we've created a framework that we can fill with the other things that make a room not just a place to live in, but an expression of the people who live there. But before we show you our completed room, let's take a second to talk about wall covering maintenance.
Most wall coverings are washable. So if you want to clean them up, use a soap or a mild detergent and wash from the baseboard up to avoid streaking. And then don't forget to dry them off after you've rinsed them. So that about does it for the basics on wall coverings. Let's go to Avian to talk about painting banisters.
By using this paint sprayer, we're making some speedy progress on this intricate railing pattern. But we can adjust the spray pattern to a wide or narrow depending on whatever type of surface we're spraying. But make sure to mask and cover your surrounding areas to protect your furnishings and floors, etc. Now when you're using your spray machine, be sure and wear a mask and eye protection, and when you're done, unplug the machine to prevent accidental spraying. That about wraps it up. What we've done is almost magically revitalized two areas that had become eyesores, a long dark hallway and a sitting room. We converted two areas that we formerly just used into two areas we enjoy.
You can improve the look of a room, beautify an interior, and enhance the value of your home with painted wallpaper like we've done here.
All you have to do is take a little bit of time, do an adequate job of prep, and give some care in choosing your color scheme.
Paint and wall covering jobs are low cost and simple to work with, so that makes it easy to do this kind of a remodeling project whenever the mood for change should strike you.
If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on other types of projects you'd like to see covered in a series, we would love to hear from you.
So join us again next week and every week for another in our series of easy and inexpensive projects so that you can do it yourself. I'm Kurt Burbick.
And I'm Avian Rogers.
And thanks for being with us.